Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we have an artist and an author telling her mother's remarkable story of not only surviving the Holocaust but also rescuing Jewish children out of Nazi-occupied France. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's special guest is all the way from Liverpool. Her name is Vivian Churney, and you're an author but also an artist as well as a teacher as well. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme today, Vivian.
It's a pleasure to be here, Simon. Thank you for inviting me.
And as we go through this interview, we're going to hear the amazing story of your mother and exploits during the Second World War and being a Holocaust survivor, but also her love and help for Jewish children to help them to escape from Nazi-occupied France. But before we get on to your mother's remarkable story, I'm sure our viewers would like to know a little bit more about you, Vivian. So can you share with us your something about your Jewish background and growing up in Liverpool, and something about the Jewish community in Liverpool?
Okay, well, I'm from Liverpool, from the Calderstones area, and my father was a doctor and my mother had myself and 3 other children, and we grew up in a very close-knit Jewish environment, and I can remember that people were always popping in the house, and I just loved living there. I was very happy there, and my friends used to pop in and we used to chat, and it was a very, very happy memory of my early childhood in Liverpool.
And what is Liverpool like as a city to be Jewish in? I know that there's a bigger Jewish community in Manchester that I'm familiar with.
Liverpool was a very big community. It was, I think it was probably the largest in the Northwest at one time. But it did dwindle, and I think this is mainly because children went to university and stayed in the city that they went to university in. So numbers have dwindled in Liverpool, but there's still a strong Jewish community, and people are very helpful and kind and look after each other, and there's lots of events and things that go on. So it is a thriving community still, but it's not large.
That's good to hear. And share with us about your God-given gifts and talents, your passion for literature, your passion for the arts, and also poetry as well, because this is a huge part of your life.
Well, my mother particularly loved literature. My father did too, but my mother was passionate about it, and she passed that on to me. And so I worked very hard to get an MA in literature and to teach it to others, because I think it's one of the greatest subjects that you can learn. It gives you an insight into people, and it also gives you an insight into the world. And I wrote poems all the way through my life, and so did my mother actually. So that's what I'm doing at the moment, is compiling a poetry book.
Wonderful, and we'll talk about your latest book in a minute. But share with us the difficulties you faced being the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. Share with us how difficult that was, knowing all the trauma that your courageous mother went through.
It was told to me by my mother in spurts. It was. She didn't tell me everything all at once. There was little snippets of information. But I knew that there was, as I grew up, that she wasn't like other mothers, that she had a sort of an emotional reaction to something that went on in the war. And sometimes I would ask her questions and she wouldn't answer me. And then sometimes she did sit down and tell me things, and I was absolutely shocked. And it's very hard for children of Holocaust victims because they feel it for their parents. They don't like that upset that you think your parents have been through. So that was the most difficult thing for me, is to hear the things she did eventually tell me.
Yeah. And can you tell us, sadly your mother, is it Sabine?
Sabine.
Died in 1997. Just tell us what kind of woman she was like. Tell us about her character, because you know you have in history sometimes these incredible people, and your mother's one of them. For the bravery and the courage that she showed, and how her parents as well kind of defied the Nazis and thought outside the box, which is incredible.
I think she always continued to think outside the box. But she was a very strong woman and very courageous. She didn't have an easy life after the war, and even in her marriage, when my father died, that wasn't an easy life for her. So she was very strong, and she taught us to be kind, caring, because she was kind and caring. She taught us to be considerate, but to be strong. And I think we've all inherited that strength from my mother, although none of us are as strong as she was. Yeah. Amazing.
And you've written this book, which is called Bound by the Scars That We Share. Share with us how you decided to write your mother's remarkable exploits during the Second War, but in a novel format.
Well, as I said, throughout my life, she told me snippets of what she'd been through and what she'd done. And when she told me about her courageous exploits during the war, she told me that I must never ever tell anyone, because she was still fearful that somebody would discover the fact that she'd done this and she'd be punished, and she had that mentality. So I decided after she died that at some point I would write something about her, but not in a factual way, because that would betray her. So I decided to put it into a novel format, and that's what I did. So I had all the information she'd given me, and I put it into a novel.
Yeah. And how important is it for you personally, Vivian, to have the opportunity to actually tell your mother's story, but in a novel, in a way that, you know, that people who might not want to read a book, historical book about the Holocaust, but can actually read it in a novel format, which is a bit easier to digest than just dealing with solid facts?
I think in a novel you can, it's somehow easier to write about the feelings and emotions as well as the events that happened. If it's a historical document, you have to be more impersonal, whereas if you're writing a novel, you can portray to the reader how the characters are feeling. And I think that's very interesting for a lot of people, how my mother would have felt when she did A, B and C during the war.
So if we start, Vivian, with your grandparents coming from Poland, tell us about their trade, the history of your family in Poland.
My grandfather was a tailor, and he was from Warsaw, as was my grandmother, and they lived there. And at that time, things were fine in Poland. Jews were assimilated into the Polish way of life, and he enjoyed his life there, but obviously at a certain point there was anti-Semitism rising in Poland, and he sensed it was time to leave, which was very clever of him, but he was a very astute man. But so they decided they would leave Poland and emigrate to Belgium, to Antwerp in Belgium, which was good really, because they did avoid what happened afterwards in Poland.
And do you know the kind of decade that did that? Was it in the late 1920s that they did this?
Well, I think it was a little bit later than that. I think it was more early 30s. it was rising. I think it actually became to the fore in 1936. I think things got very bad in Poland, but I think they'd left by then.
And
I don't know the exact date that they left.
And that would have been a big sacrifice, wouldn't it? To know that you have your family there, your family connections, your work there, speaking Polish and Yiddish probably as well.
Yeah, absolutely Yiddish. Yeah.
And then having to go to Belgium, a completely different country.
I think it was the beginning of their nomadic life that they had to lead afterwards. But I think my grandfather was a very strong man, and I think he knew when things had to be done. And I think my grandmother was also a very strong lady, and between them they decided that their family must come first rather than their happiness and living in a particular place. They thought it would be better to be safe.
So clearly his probably experience that he faced, probably younger, or certainly his parents would have faced the pogroms from the kind of the Russian Tsars.
Yes, the Russian, yes.
And that must have been something that we don't want to repeat of this.
Yes.
Rather than the mainstream thinking, I think, at the time within the Polish community.
But I think it did start, didn't it? The pogroms did start in the 30s in Poland.
Yeah. And how did they manage to, what you know of, how did they manage to build a life for themselves in Antwerp?
In Antwerp. Well, he was a tailor. He offered a service, and he worked very hard, and his wife was very astute. And I remember my mother telling me that she knew every customer. She knew what they'd paid for what, and how much they owed and things like that, and it was all in her head. She never wrote anything down, they did build a life for themselves with their children.
Which is amazing. Let's have a look at this excellent CBN news item that deals with this very, very difficult subject that we have to deal with, which is the Holocaust.
Czechoslovakia was an exemplary democracy in Europe, and the Czechs never thought Adolf Hitler would make a move to invade it. But on March 16, 1939, the Czechs awoke to a new reality.
I opened the radio and heard the president say, "Be all of you quiet, don't fight, don't do anything. The Germans occupied Czechoslovakia."
For teenager Hanna Malka and others like her, life wouldn't be the same.
For the Jews, everything changed. First of all, I couldn't go anymore to school. Then I couldn't speak with my friends, and I was, at my age, the only Jewish girl.
Hanna shared her story with journalists through a social initiative called Zikaron Basalan, Living Room Remembrance. Founded 11 years ago in Israel, it's now in 65 countries, touching some 2 million people. It aims to connect Holocaust survivors with young people.
Then we had to give half of our flat to a Jewish family because the Germans needed flats for the German. After that, we had to go to a small village, and it was very lonely and very, very bad, so my mother sent me to Prague.
In the Czech capital's Jewish quarter, life continued for 2.5 years. Then, in November 1941, Adolf Hitler said he was giving the Jews a city and began transporting them to the Theresienstadt ghetto.
I was living in a flat of Czech family, so we were about 70 people in a 2-room flat with one WC and with one place to wash themselves. For people of our age, it was actually, we could manage. We made each other and speak with other. I had always the feeling that everyone there wanted to give the best of himself so that to make other people a little more happy.
Hitler used Theresienstadt for propaganda to deceive the world about what his true intentions were for the Jewish people. The children even put on an opera called Brundibar.
And it said that Brundibar was a bad man who wanted to do bad to them and wanted to send them somewhere, but they were fighting against him, and in the end they succeeded to be the winners.
Older people were deceived into paying money to go to Theresienstadt, thinking they were getting special treatment.
50 people died every day.
And all the time the Nazis were transporting people to Auschwitz in Poland. Eventually, Hannah and the other children were also loaded on a dark cattle car and forced to travel for days without food or water. The notorious Dr. Joseph Mengele was among those greeting them upon their arrival. He chose 200 girls, including Hannah, to be used as laborers and sent everyone else to the gas chambers.
We had to put down everything we wore naked, and they took our hair, not only from the head, but from the body. Everyone got a dress, mostly a summer dress, and we asked where are all the other 1,500 people. And they told us, look to the sky and you see the smoke. These are the 1,500 people.
Hannah and the 200 girls were then sent to Germany, and she spent the rest of the war as a maid or working in a factory for the Germans. According to Hannah, they always tried to guard their humanity.
We wanted to stay people all the time. Maybe we didn't see like people, but we felt like people.
As Germany began to fall, Hannah's life was once again in danger.
They wanted to send us somewhere where they could finish us because they didn't want that the Allies should see what they made from us. But because of all these bombardments, they couldn't do it.
After the war, Hannah returned to Prague, riding halfway on a Russian tank, and life began to return to normal.
And then I didn't want to stay. The Russians came to Czechoslovakia. They were two people. They were the Russians and the Americans. And the Americans were good, but the Russians, not so much to speak about it.
In 1946, Hannah came to pre-state Israel. Like many survivors, she didn't share her story for years. Hannah's granddaughter, Ya'ara Malka, who joins her at events, was a teenager when she first heard her grandmother's story.
But the first time that I realized all the story is when I go with her to Germany. She taught in the schools, and then I got all the picture and understand everything.
Hannah, who will soon be 100 years old, has 2 children, 5 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. After all she went through, she says she wants people to remember, no matter how bad a situation is, there's something or someone good to be found. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Tel Aviv, Israel.
And that was Hannah's remarkable story of surviving the Holocaust. And Holocaust survivors are extremely precious. Not many of them are around, and this is why we've got to cherish them and also get them to share their stories so this never happens again. Vivian, but I know Belgium very well, I know Brussels, and I know that Antwerp, for example, is very famous for being a kind of diamond district, which attracts a lot of Jewish people. A lot of Orthodox Jewish people live in Antwerp even today. But can you just share your grandparents' concern, really, with the rise of Nazism in the late 1930s, particularly their thoughts about the Nazi invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939? Well,
I think that they were absolutely distraught to hear about Adolf Hitler's invasion of Poland. They had family there, and I know that there was one survivor and his family, but most of my grandparents' family were killed. But obviously this was prior to that, and they were terrified. And they were terrified that the Germans were going to come into Belgium, which they eventually did. And obviously terrified for their children, and also worried that this has happened to them before, maybe not on quite such a large scale, but that why were people persecuting Jews? Why were Jews being targeted? They're human beings, and I think they felt that this was totally wrong and abhorrent, and also extremely fearful of their own lives and the lives of their friends and the rest of the Jewish community in Antwerp, which was very, very strong at the time.
Yeah, we know the horrific Nazi invasion through Blitzkrieg of the Netherlands, and then into Belgium, and then the occupation of France, which literally took a matter of somewhere around 6 weeks. Incredible speed. And what would it have been like then for your grandparents and your mother, Sabine, who was a teenager at the time, to actually be in Belgium under Nazi occupation?
Well, I think it was terrifying. It was, they would look out of the window and see people being brutally treated, shop windows broken into, the words Juden and other horrible things written all over the shops. They saw a lot of awful things, and they had not registered as being Jewish yet, and so they were terrified. They didn't know what to do. And I know that my grandfather was in a group of people who got together to try and resist what was happening in secret.
It's quite extraordinary. And also, can you share with something about your mother, Sabine, the fact that she probably looked like you, Vivian, as well, with the blonde hair and the kind of blue eyes, that she was not seen as, you know, as being Jewish, so that gave her a lot more freedom to go out and to shop and to really monitor what was going on.
I think this was the sort of beginning of her courage and her bravery, because they did have some food, but she would go out and purchase more. That the difficult thing for her as a young girl would be walking through the streets, seeing the German soldiers and seeing the treatment of Jews, you know, being made to walk in the gutters, just awful treatment of Jews. It was terrifying for her, but she was brave enough to continue to go and do that.
Yeah, and can you share with us the account in your novel of how much you actually know of this situation when she had an encounter with a German officer?
I think what happened was that she looked quite Aryan, if you like, and she walked past some German soldiers, and one of them took a shine to her, and she walked quickly and tried to get away, and he got hold of her, and she thought this was the end of her life. She was so frightened and so terrified that she made herself vomit over his boots, and he was so shocked that she was able to run away and escape. And she didn't want to tell her family what had happened, but she did. She knew she had to, because this was why they started to move.
Yeah, but also share the incredible wisdom again of your grandfather. What was your grandfather's name?
His name was Shea, which can be translated into Samuel.
And just share the kind of remarkable story that with him, that, for example, he didn't go with convention. He didn't go with the kind of wisdom of the Jewish community there in Belgium, which was the Nazis were forcing the Jewish people then to register and to register the fact they were Jewish and wear the yellow star, because he saw this as a death sentence.
He did.
Share with us the incredible insight that he had to do that.
Well, he said to his family, when these papers arrived, that he wasn't going to sign them in any way. He wasn't going to sign them. And he said, we are not going to sign. And his family was saying, well, we have to. This is the law. We have to. And he said, we don't have to. And we're not going to. And this really helped them. He also said that none of us are to put this yellow star on. We are not going to be parading ourselves as Jews in order to be killed. So they didn't wear the yellow star either. I think my mother got her strength from him. I do
Incredible.
really believe that.
Incredible. And share with us, I'm giving so much of the book away, but I'm so intrigued, and I'm sure our viewers are as well, about hearing your mother's remarkable story. I know that they'll get the book and
well, it'll be much more
format.
detailed than I'm giving
exactly,
here.
but also share how your grandparents then really met up with the Belgian resistance, and how they actually thought that their life was in danger being in Antwerp in Belgium, that they needed to get out. So share with us what you can about the idea of actually going to France, and how remarkable that they were actually smuggled out of Belgium into France, into the countryside.
Okay, so after the incident with the soldier, my grandfather said, well, we'll have to move out of our home now. We'll have to go and be hidden. And they were hidden in various places in Antwerp, different places. And but it got to the point where they thought it was too risky to stay there. So they did get help from the resistance to have a driver to take them in a van to France. And this was horrendous, very tricky journey, obviously. And they were hidden under the floorboards of the van, which was covered in straw. And so that's what they did.
And how long would that journey have been?
I think it would have taken them weeks and weeks.
Wow. And also they face German checkpoints as well.
They did face a German checkpoint. And I know they must have been petrified. My mother said it was the most frightening thing because she could hear their voices, and they prodded the straw with their guns, but they didn't find them.
Amazing.
And that was a miracle. On they went to France to be away from the city. I think they thought that was a better option.
There's one thing I'm beginning to piece together, not only through this interview, but also through your book as well, and that is the incredible foresight that your grandfather had again, to actually then think, look, it's not safe to be in a city. Let's get out to France. It's bigger, open, wide countryside. We're not going to have in touch with that many people around us. This is a safer option. So to have that bravery and that courage to actually do that, even though that France was occupied by the Nazis as well, took incredible foresight, courage, and bravery just to think out, constantly thinking outside the box and thinking strategically.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it started when he left Poland, and I think as Jews, it was almost inevitable at that time that they didn't have a safe haven to call home.
Yeah, and do you know much about I know you mention it in your novel as well, but do you know much about the barn where your mother and your grandparents?
I know that my mother said it was awful, and she said it was unbearable, and her sister hated it, and my mother was bitten with mosquitoes. She never ever went to France again for the rest of her life. She said it was really, really unbearable, but their father insisted that this was preferable to the alternative, which would be a camp. So I think it was at this time that my mother decided she would try and do something to try and help.
And was that out of boredom?
I don't think it was out of boredom. I think it was because she wasn't a person to sit around and do nothing. I mean, she could read and she could sing and she could play the piano. She was very talented. But I think she felt the urge to do something. And a lot of people are like that, aren't they? They want to do something to try and help others. And that's what she wanted to do.
How much do you know of, and you mentioned in the book as well, of how your mother and your family really connected with the French resistance. And this is, I think, the most amazing part of your mother's story during the Second World War, of
Yes.
joining the French resistance
Yes.
and then helping Jewish children escape Nazi-occupied France to make it to kind of neutral Switzerland. I mean,
Yes.
this is stuff of films, this is kind of Hollywood-esque,
Yeah.
and this is what's
It
so
is.
incredible.
It is incredible, and she told me very little, but she told me that she joined a youth movement which existed in France at the time, where they trained young people to help these children go through the forest and reach Switzerland. And she begged her father to let her join, which he did eventually, because he and his wife thought that she would be rescued too, that she would be able to be safe in Switzerland. So that was one of the reasons they agreed to it. But, so I think it was that she wanted to do something. She trained with them, and that's what she did. She took these children through the woods, through the mountains, through the snow, and it's a good job she was trained to do it, because it must have been horrendous. She had somebody with her who knew, and some Swiss men and women who also were very brave. They helped them to get through as well.
Amazing. And that would have been really dangerous. Probably
much
would have
so.
had also, German patrols as well,
Yeah.
with dogs as well through the area to try and
Yes.
stop people fleeing
Yes.
into
Yeah.
Switzerland.
Yeah.
You don't have any idea of how far she probably would have walked, or?
No, I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. I know it took a long, arduous trek, she told me, but I don't know how far it is.
But share with us how really the unselfishness of your mother, Sabine, because the easy option would have been there to, however unbearable the farm or where they were staying, or the barn they were staying in, they knew that they were safe there to a certain extent. I don't think they ever felt 100% safe, but they would have felt a lot safe. But then to actually put yourself out to then kind of rescue Jewish children, you put yourself in the firing line.
Yeah.
And just share what type of character your mother was to actually do that, because this is her legacy. The rescuing
Yeah.
of these Jewish.
Well, I
people,
think
children.
she inherited this legacy, or this part of her character, from her father, because before the war, he used to bring people into the house if they were hungry or if they were homeless, and give them food, which not a lot of people did. And I think that she did the same. She wanted to help others, and I think she remained like that all her life. She always wanted to help people. She was so kind and considerate of others, and she passed that on to us. And I think it's a very, very strong trait to have.
Wonderful. So let's have a look at another teenager who sadly perished in the Holocaust. But this is her diary and her letters that was actually found that just shared what she went through as a typical Jewish teenager during the Holocaust.
This is 14-year-old Rutka Lasker, a beautiful young girl whose family was forced to live in the Jewish ghetto during the Nazi occupation of Poland. For 4 months in 1943, she recorded her life, memories of a typical teenager mixed with the unbelievable horrors of the Holocaust. Her story survived thanks to a non-Jewish friend entrusted with the diary months before she, her baby brother and mother perished in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. After 60 years, that friend, now in her 80s, revealed her secret, that she had kept Rutka's diary. The news was life-changing for Rutka's half-sister, Zahava Shares.
I simply felt in love with her, and I was also full with sorrow that I couldn't meet her.
Dr. Zahava Shares of Israel was born after World War II to Rutka's father, who narrowly survived the Holocaust and remarried. After learning of her half-sister's diary, she felt the world needed to know the story and helped publish Rucka's Notebook, A Voice from the Holocaust.
She was an extraordinary girl. As you can see from the picture, she was beautiful. And she knows that the Nazis are determined to kill the Jews, and they are throwing them to gas chambers. And she writes specifically, I would like to live, but I don't think that we Jews are going to make it.
In one of her entries, Rucka writes about witnessing a horrible act committed by a German soldier. I am writing this as if nothing has happened, as if I were in an army experienced in cruelty. But I'm young, I'm 14, and I haven't seen much in my life. Now I'm terrified when I see uniforms. I'm turning into an animal waiting to die. One can lose one's mind thinking about this. While Rucka seems to know, and even writes that she will probably not survive the war, she also finds the time to document the daily dramas of a young teenage girl. I'm persuading myself that I'm not in love with Yannick, but in the meantime, I miss him, and sometimes I suffer because I don't see him and hear his voice.
She was starting to discover herself as a growing woman, and she's becoming aware of her being attractive and her being attracted to a young boy named Yannick. So in this sense, you feel like it's a modern girl that's a regular story.
But of course, her story was anything but regular. Rucka's attempts to enjoy the simplest pleasures in life were overshadowed by reports that Jews were being sent to death camps. She feared this was her fate as well. The rope around us is getting tighter and tighter. Despite all these atrocities, I want to live and wait for the following day.
This is also something which is emotionally very hard to read, that a young girl, 14 years old, so cheerful and so much aware of what's going on. This was also a surprise for me because we didn't think that the Jewish people in Poland knew exactly what's going to happen to them.
Zahava says her hope is that Rucka's story will become part of the curriculum in schools around the world, such as Poland, where non-Jewish students are already reading the story.
And they love Rutka, they love the story. They feel very close to her. And I asked them, can you be a friend of Rutka? Could you be a friend of Rutka? And they said yes, because she's so much like us.
As Israel celebrates its 60th anniversary this month, Zahava says Rucka's story is a good reminder of how important the state of Israel is for the Jewish people.
This story reminds the world and reminds us that we should keep the country, we should be good, we should be an example for the world, and we should educate our nation and the other that these kind, like the Holocaust, will never happen again.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News.
And to get a full picture of the absolute horror and absolute evil of the Holocaust, I think it's so important that we get to understand some of the teenagers and what they went through, particularly Jewish teenagers and their experience of the Holocaust, their whole life ahead of them, and suddenly just cut short in the most horrific way. Vivian, share with us a story that you're about to share with me as we saw that very moving CBN News report of a young teenage girl that shared her experience of what she went through in the Holocaust, of what happened to your family in a train.
Well, she told me very briefly about a time when she was on the train with her family. And I don't know where they were going to or where they were coming from, but she said that the train stopped at a station and they all saw the German officers getting on board and they jumped off the train, all of them. And I think they just ran as fast as they could to wherever they went to. And she did tell me this story, but I don't know enough details about it, but it did happen to her.
Amazing. Just again showing courage and constantly on her wits and everything else. As you describe in the novel, as kind of D-Day approached and we had the Allied, the Operation Overlord, as it's known, with the Allied forces having a beachhead in Normandy, part of the D-Day landings. Share with us then how your grandparents then decided to go back to Brussels, but this time to be in Brussels, but actually to live so close to the Nazi SS office, which is extraordinary.
They did. I mean, my grandfather thought it was a good idea, because he thought that no one would ever think of looking for Jews hiding opposite the Gestapo headquarters. And so they did live there for a while, and it must have been absolutely terrifying for them to live there. But unfortunately, one day there was a shout at the door, and there were German soldiers were shouting, and they all ran down a fire escape at the back of the flat that they were living in, and ran away and were hidden in a bakery. And the German soldiers didn't go round the back of the building, which was another miracle that happened. They came in with their dogs and guns and everything, and they managed to escape.
Amazing. Amazing. I definitely think a film needs to be made on your mother's life. Absolutely extraordinary, absolutely gripping and compelling and fascinating. What happened to your mother after the war? Because Belgium and would have been liberated by the Allied forces.
Well, she spoke a number of languages, and she worked in the Nuremberg trials as a translator, which I think was very cathartic for her, because she could see perpetrators of these crimes being charged. And there was one incident where she was in the ladies' toilets, and she listened to the two cleaners in there, and they'd said that they were commandants in one of the camps, these two women, and my mother was terrified. She could understand what they were saying. So she ran and told one of the officers of the court, and they were promptly arrested.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how did your mother get to England? Tell us that story.
Before the war, my grandfather's brother moved to London, and he lived in London, and she came to visit him, and some friends of his introduced my mother to my father, and that's how she met him and lived, because he was a doctor, he had a practice in Liverpool, and when he asked her to marry him, and he said if she didn't, he would give up everything. And so she said yes.
Amazing.
And she moved to Liverpool.
Yeah. So what happened to your grandparents as well?
My grandparents stayed in Antwerp. They didn't live to a very old age. And I think my grandmother died in 1960, and my grandfather died not long after she did. They were broken people, really.
Oh. Incredible people, though. Just amazing. And reflecting on your mother's life, particularly in your book, which is, again, I'll show it to you, Bound by the Scars That We Share, and you can get a copy of that. And you can certainly see a copy of where you can get that from Vivian's website as well. So if you're interested in art and poetry, definitely worth a visit. Can you share with some of the poems that your mother wrote as well, because they're really moving?
Not my mother, I wrote these.
You wrote them, sorry.
Oh, I wrote them at the beginning, yeah. My mother did write poems, and I haven't got them with me, but I'll just read a couple of the poems. They kind of complement each other according to the book. Good fortune is a fleeting breeze, flighty and fidgety as a child. It makes you calm and feel at ease, but its gentle touch soon leaves you behind. Alas, sorrow clings and holds on tight, and does not seem to want to depart. The feeling stays like an endless night, and remains there like a dagger through your heart. And to go with that, I've written a poem which talks about strength and dealing with life as a woman. A woman's strength comes from within. Her intuition is bold and her love is fervent. The strength of a woman's sadness ripples like her happiness. Her strength is gentle, yet mighty, ethereal and realistic. A woman with strength in her soul is a blessing.
Thank you. Very beautiful. Thank you. And Vivian, why is it so important for you as well to tell your mother's story, Sabine's story? Why is it so important?
It's important to tell my mother's story because the Holocaust, whether or not you were in a camp or whether you suffered because of the war, is so important to tell because it should never, ever happen again. And we need to educate people. We need to tell people what happened. People think, oh, it'll never happen again. But there is constant anti-Semitism that exists now. And it's only with educating people, particularly young people, about what could happen if things escalated in terms of anti-Semitism.
Yeah. And it's so important, isn't it, what you're doing, Vivian, because you are really telling your mother's story, and it's so important that the children of Holocaust survivors that are no longer around anymore, that you keep their memories alive, because that's the greatest danger that Israel fears, is that when the last of these survivors die out, that first-hand testimony of what they went through, that it will fall on deaf ears. I think this is also why Spielberg decided to have as many Holocaust survivors on record to tell their story. This is why also I think I've had the pleasure of interviewing over 10 Holocaust survivors to tell their story, so that we teach the next generation and generations of the dangers of what happens when you allow Jew hatred to go out of control, and to say that the horrors of the Holocaust that happened should never ever happen again. Your thoughts?
I agree. I think there isn't an answer to the reason why there is anti-Semitism, why people dislike Jewish people. It's there, and what do we do to change that? What do? We have to keep reminding people that the Holocaust was caused by that attitude, and this is what we must do, and this is what my book hopefully will do, amongst other things. It will do that, and my story about my mother will do that.
And Vivian, do you want to share with our viewers where they can get hold of your novel to read about your mother's remarkable exploits during the Second World War? I mean, not only surviving the Holocaust, which is a miracle in itself, but also then to rescue Jewish children and get them to safety. Well,
my novel is in Holocaust museums globally, and particularly in Yad Vashem. And I'm so happy that it's in Yad Vashem, because when I went there, the story was so awful. The Holocaust was so terrible. The pictures, the stories that were going on, and I knew that my mother would be there one day, in novel form, and so the novel can be bought on Amazon, in Waterstones, any online bookstore. You'll be able to find it. You can order it at Smith's, you can order it anywhere.
Yeah, and it's also, you can visit the website, which is vivianchurney.co.uk. There we go, it's on screen. And Vivian, what's it like to know that your mother's story is actually in Yad Vashem and various other Holocaust museums around the world for posterity, really?
Well, it is there for posterity. As I did say that when I went there, I cried. And I didn't know why I was crying. And I said to my husband, one day my mother's going to be here. Her memory is going to be here. And when Yad Vashem wrote to me a letter saying that it was a valuable contribution to history, and that her memory and what she'd been through would be there for posterity.
Right, there's just that one bit of the jigsaw puzzle that is actually missing, isn't it, at the moment? And that is to find the families of those Jewish children she rescued. And how many children, we don't know how many she actually rescued, but to think that they would have had families and they would have had families.
Yes.
And that's when I interview survivors, is saying, this is how we won. This is how we defeated Hitler. This is how we defeated Nazis.
Yes.
It's by the fact that we lived. We had families, and we left a legacy.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And I think all those children must have some memory of how she took them through the woods and took them to safety, and they were able to live a life in safety.
Amazing. Amazing. And you also spoke, didn't you, at the memorial service in Liverpool, and this is my friends from ICJ UK introduced me to you.
Yes.
So I'm very grateful for that. But how important is it that cities like Liverpool and major cities across the country mark International Holocaust Memorial Day?
Extremely important. Liverpool did an amazing job, a fantastic job. I was so moved. The schools there read from Holocaust victims' testimonies. The music that was played was incredible. And it really was a fantastic, almost showed a fantastic understanding of what Jewish people had been through. And I think all cities mark it now, don't they, in order to commemorate that day.
And for our viewers watching as well, who are predominantly Christian, who love Israel, who love the Jewish people, how can they stand alongside the Jewish communities with this rise of Jew hatred? How can they also keep the memory of the Holocaust alive for future generations?
Well, I think the support which people give to Israel, particularly you and your group, is vitally important, because those people in Israel are surviving for their existence, and I think that their existence is necessary as a country.
Yeah, and it's the only Jewish state in the world. There is no other Jewish state, and that's Israel. And share with us, Vivian, something of your mother's legacy, supreme legacy, that we could all learn something. I mean, I've learned something very much, I think, more from your kind of grandfather, in the way that he assessed situations, he looked at things strategically, he was able to remain incredibly calm despite all the fear around him and not be consumed by fear, not go with the rest of the crowd. But then also, I think was also remarkable is that he decided not to stay with his family in one place, always keep moving. Never stay in the same place for long enough to be discovered. Now, you know, I think your grandfather should have written a book as well, which is extraordinary. But share with us the legacy that our viewers can take from your mother, Sabine.
Well, I think you've described my grandfather, but if you'd known my mother, she was exactly like him. And, you know, my father died when we were 16. when I was 16, and she brought up her family alone. She got herself a degree in languages. She taught languages. She did an awful lot of things to bring us all up without a father. And that is the legacy which her father had given her the strength to do, because she'd been through so much as a young girl and been through quite a lot as a married woman and as a widow, that her strength and her courage and her ability to survive, I think that is her legacy.
And you must be very proud. So how proud are you are able to tell your mother's incredible story in a novel format?
I'm proud of her, and I am happy that I have had the ability to write the story and for people to have read it and for it to be in Yad Vashem and other museums so that it will be there for forever.
Which is amazing, isn't it? It's incredible. And also you give your Jewish community something back as well.
Yes.
Because they have someone now that they can be proud of and what have you. Vivian, it's been an absolute pleasure to interview on the Middle East Report today. I think you've done an amazing job. Thank you so much for writing this novel. Thank you so much for telling us your mother's remarkable story of not only surviving the Holocaust but actually rescuing Jewish children. The only thing is we need to find those Jewish children.
We do. We'll go on a search. Thank you very, very much, Simon. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. And I just want to thank you for watching this programme today. We've heard the incredible story of Vivian's mother, Sabine, not only how she survived the Holocaust, but also how she rescued Jewish children in occupied Nazi France to get them to safety in Switzerland, which takes incredible courage. These stories about the Holocaust need to be told because we've got to remember of the horrors that happened to the Jewish people, where over 6 million were murdered on an industrial scale, and we can't allow that to happen or watch. That's why we've got to love and support the Jewish community and the State of Israel. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.